My name is Donovan, and I am defending the Anopheles quadrimaculus, otherwise known as the common malaria mosquito.
My name is Ihan Moss, and I'm defending the Xenopsila chiopus, otherwise known as the plague vector oriental rat flea. This debate is to determine which species has caused more human suffering.
The common malaria mosquito has caused more human suffering by being the exclusive carrier of the deadly disease malaria, one of the most impactful diseases in the history of humanity. Even with modern medicine today, malaria still reaches over 240 million people a year, and symptoms can last to up to 24 weeks, resulting in an abundance of human suffering. Don't let your idea of modern medicine today trick you into downplaying the current effects of malaria on people. Malaria most commonly occurs in Africa, where medicine is limited compared to the medicine you know in America. Because of the location of this disease, humans suffer more from it due to the lack of resources to treat it and the malnutrition that already exists in the area, thus magnifying the disease symptoms. The symptoms include nausea, headaches, chills, fever, and more. Along with this, the disease claims 600,000 lives a year in modern times. Now, this is just in modern times, where medicine has come into play and reduced malaria causes and deaths significantly. But what about throughout history? Malaria is estimated to be one of the largest killers in history, if not the largest. To give perspective, in just the last century, even with the medicine we had then, malaria claimed over 200 million lives with over a billion cases. The mosquito plays a key role in distributing this disease as its exclusive carrier. Female mosquitoes must take blood meals to produce eggs, and in doing so, have contracted malaria parasites from a human carrier and then redistributed it to others while drinking more blood through their saliva. Malaria is not a contagious disease, so it is correct to say that all human suffering caused by malaria is directly caused by the malaria mosquito. The effect is prominent in Africa, where healthcare is limited, resulting in a greater magnitude of deaths and suffering. But it is also spread to the Middle East, South Asia, and Southern America. This is made possible due to a high number of eggs laid by females to allow for population growth. The CDC indicates that female mosquitoes lay between 50 to 200 eggs that are relatively high in survivability, resulting in an ever-growing population that has traveled and expanded to the region it covers now. Additionally, the disease most often kills children, and with their underdeveloped immune systems, the symptoms and suffering would be amplified.
Now, the plague vector oriental rat flea has had a greater impact on human suffering by being responsible for spreading one of the most excruciating and deadly diseases ever recorded. The Xenopsila chiopus, otherwise known as the plague vector oriental rat flea, is in the Siphonophora order, meaning wingless tube. The flea undergoes complete metamorphosis, going from an egg to larva to puppa in a cocoon before emerging as an adult. Although the plague isn't as prevalent today, the oriental rat flea still transmits their diseases, but improvements in medicine and hygiene make the disease a rare outbreak. The plague came in three large waves, first in the 1300s, 1500s, and lastly the 1900s. The plague was a disease that first started in rats, wiping out large populations of these rodents. As rat populations dwindled, the fleas got hungry and started to feed off of other organisms like humans, and humans could spread amongst each other just by being in the same presence. The bubonic plague, otherwise known as the Black Death, was so deadly because of how horrible the victims' deaths were, how quickly the disease could spread, and the extremely low survival rates of those who contracted the disease. Between the 6 years of 1346 to 1352, 20 million, or a fifth of the total population of all Europeans, died from the plague. The plague victims experienced a rapid decline in health, as most went from perfectly healthy to dead in the matter of only 6 days. The quick deaths and rapid spread throughout the communities left people unable to combat or understand the force of the plague. There are many stories of boats that set sail and rodents on the boat helped the fleas spread the plague. Weeks later, those boats will wash up on shores filled with corpses, and the unlucky finders of that boat oftentimes spell doom for their entire community. This goes to show how easily and quickly this disease could spread, and how just one contact with the victim could quickly result in everyone you know being dead in a couple of days. We also saw that the plague being exploited in war, as armies would catapult dead soldiers with the plague over besieged towns and help further spread this disease. The problem is that the disease was so contagious that these armies would often have to put a halt on their war because their camps would suffer such greatness that the war was no longer their greatest issue. The plague first makes its presence known with the large lymph nodes called buboes that cover a person that swell and get larger. Eventually bursting, this stage was recorded as being quite agonizing, and half of the infected were dead at this point. If still alive, The next few days will be even worse. Victims will go into septic shock, have nonstop seizures, watch their fingers, toes, and nose turn black and wither away. Those are just a couple of the horrible common side effects, along with vomiting blood, terrible aches, and other various side effects before the mercy of death finally stops their suffering.
The common malaria mosquito has had a greater impact than the oriental rat flea due to the longevity of its impact. Despite the oriental rat flea being a vector in some of the largest plagues known to mankind, as Ihan previously said, it is not the exclusive carrier, so its impact cannot be fully known. Moreover, the plague it helps to carry doesn't span fully throughout history, which is why the common malaria mosquito has had a greater impact. Malaria has been prevalent in human society for continuous years, spanning way back into history, while the plagues transmitted by the rat flea come in short periods with higher intensity of impact. Despite this, the change in intensity of human suffering does not account for the limitation in the time span to equate to the impact of the malaria mosquito. In the 20th century alone, malaria killed over 150 million people, according to the CDC. That's more than 8 times the amount of the deaths caused by the deadliest plague associated with the rat flea, according to National Geographic. Additionally, malaria still reaches people today with 240 million cases and 600,000 deaths, while plagues transmitting by the rat flea have been effectively neutralized by modern medicine today.
The oriental rat flea has had a greater human impact than the malaria mosquito, mainly from the extreme mortality rates of populations and impact on human lifestyle. Although the common malaria mosquito is very prevalent today in Africa, the peak of the plague was much more deadly than malaria ever was. Additionally, malaria has also been effectively neutralized by modern medicine, but many lower-income communities in Africa don't have access to modern-day medicine. Realizing the problem the plague spread, the Red Cross more aggressively pushed to eliminate the plague as opposed to malaria. On the other hand, through its first outbreak in the mid-1300s, it was estimated that about 30 to 60% of the population of Europe died from the Black Plague. Being such an aggressive pathogen, some towns like Florence, Italy, had over 90% of their population dead, while the rest fleeing the city, helping spread the disease further. Some forms of the plague often resulted in death only 36 hours after the initial exposure to the disease. With so many people catching the disease, doctors had to stop treating patients and people died in the middle of the streets and rotted there because there were not enough survivors to dig graves large enough to fill everyone with them.
My opposition here is trying to trick you with fancy numbers. He is trying to pit modern-day fatality rates against fatality rates in the 14th century, where there was nowhere near the medicine we have today, and he is trying to claim that his insect takes full credit for the plague, where there are many other carriers of it. Unlike the rat flea with the plague, the malaria mosquito is the exclusive carrier of malaria, so it can take full credit for all the causes of the disease, while the same cannot be said for the rat flea. He also says that malaria has been effectively neutralized, but this is far from true. Just 3 years ago, the CDC reported over 600,000 deaths as a result of malaria, with an estimated 241 million cases. That does not sound like a neutralized disease to me. Additionally, he speaks about his disease being more deadly, yet malaria has caused more deaths. So even so, this case is about suffering. So wouldn't it be more about the number of people it affects and how long they suffer? The plague killed people in around 36 hours, as attributed by my opponent, while malaria lasts for up to 24 weeks and significantly more people, according to the CDC. It is very clear that the overall reach of malaria covers far more areas across exponentially greater time periods, resulting in more cases, more deaths, and ultimately more human suffering.
Even though malaria has caused 240 million cases a year, only 600,000 of those end up dying, meaning only 1 out of every 400 cases die. Reading a study by UNRIC, the majority of severe malaria cases are closely correlated with poverty, with most of cases of malaria easily treated with proper access to health care. The chance of surviving the plague was much lower, at around 70% or more of the victims dying. Malaria is a much tamer disease in comparison to the plague, with flu-like symptoms as opposed to bursting buboes and rotting limbs that end up resulting in a higher rate of death. My opposition really tries to sneak in how the flea wasn't the only transmitter of the disease, but that is a fallacy from our lack of research. The flea spreads the disease at first, But an aggressive disease like the plague has multiple ways to reach its next victim, whether it be through airborne particles, flea bites, or human contact. When talking about the impact on human life, the oriental rat flea has had a bigger impact due to the population impact on communities, minuscule survival rates, and horrific deaths.
By being the exclusive carrier of malaria, the common malaria mosquito, specifically the females, have caused more human suffering than the oriental rat flea due to the longevity of its transmitted disease, the large spread of the disease across the world, and the higher death total. Female mosquitoes are constantly feeding and spreading this disease, even today, and have been doing this consistently for centuries. Another important point is the fact that malaria covers much more ground than the plague ever did. While the plague was contained mostly to Europe, malaria has spread from Africa to Asia and South America as well, multiplying the magnitude of people that are affected by the disease. These two factors have led to malaria affecting much more people throughout history. Lastly, the deadly disease has caused substantially more deaths than any disease caused by the rat flea. By affecting more people throughout history for substantially longer periods of time across a greater portion of the world and causing more deaths, the common malaria mosquito has caused more human suffering. It is impossible to argue that 5 years of concentrated suffering equates to centuries of death and suffering.
As far as human impact goes, the oriental rat flea has caused a more severe and deadly toll on humans' lives than the common malaria mosquito. Crippling entire families, villages, and countries, the high mortality rate combined with the extreme pathogenic spreadability saw the bubonic plague wipe out more than half of Europe's population. With malaria accounting for about 0.9% of people's cause of death, or about 0.0007% of the worldwide population per year, it seems quite small compared to 30 to 60% of the world population decreased in the matter of a couple of years. Although plague was much briefer in its large-scale terror, an increase in access to modern medicine in impoverished communities would also spell a similar fate to malaria. When being compared to a disease that is less deadly than flu, it is hard to be serious when arguing against the bubonic plague. Quite frankly, I'd rather take antibiotics and cure malaria than take a chance to experience the gruesome effects of the plague. Thank you.